What's up, everybody? This is Alex from WMD, back at you again. This time we're going to be talking about modulation, specifically ring modulation and amplitude modulation using the WMD DVCA, also known as the digital VCA, kind of the second incarnation of the digital VCA, but it's the DVCA. It's two VCAs, so you could call it the dual VCA in 4HP. So nice small package. And the cool thing about the DVCA is that it uses a digital detector circuit that can detect your zero crossing point, so that way you get no clicks or pops with really fast envelopes. So when you're using like a sine wave or a low frequency wave that's nice and smooth, a lot of times when you're going to be using a really fast snappy envelope on a VCA, you're introducing sudden ons. So you're basically introducing a square edge to that sine wave, which is interpreted as a pop. So the DVCA helps with that. So you can be using like sub-bass, sine wave kind of stuff, using fast envelopes, and you won't get any sort of clicks or pops added to that signal. Just nice, fast envelopes. Another really nice thing about the DVCA is that on the first channel, you can use it as a bipolar VCA. So a bipolar VCA takes your incoming wave, and when you add positive CV, it just lets that wave through, just like a normal VCA, right? So now we've got no signal going through. You send it with CV, we're letting signal through. No CV, no signal. So on the other side, if you hit it with negative CV, it lets the signal through while inverting that signal. So now you get through zero modulation. So it lets you go through the 0 point with the modulation. It doesn't just stop and clip and then come back up, which is what amplitude modulation does. That's more of a mono or unipolar kind of thing. It only works in the positive frequency range when it comes to your modulation. So ring modulation actually gives you more harmonics, more high frequency tones than just regular old amplitude modulation. So yeah, there's tons of modules out there that you can use as ring modulators. There's ring modulator modules that have a oscillator built in, but if you've got two oscillators and a DVCA, you can rock that, and then we can use the other side as our normal VCA to let the signal through. So I saw a post recently on Facebook or Muffwiggler or somewhere, I can't exactly remember where someone was asking, what are some practical uses of ring modulation? It kind of seems like this thing that just makes kind of cool, spacey sounds, but doesn't really, can't really be used as a part of a voice, right? So that took me down a rabbit hole of just kind of messing around with bipolar amplitude modulation, as well as amplitude modulation. It's just unipolar. And I came up with some pretty cool stuff, and it inspired me to make this video. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to the patch that I've made and just kind of talk about that. Then we're going to tear it apart, recreate it from scratch, and then experiment a little bit more with modulation. So here's what I've got. Now keep in mind there are no filters attached to this patch. I've literally got a cable hanging out of my Pole Zero for no reason. So if we turn down our modulating oscillator, we're going to get a nice smooth wave. So let's listen to what we're actually hearing real quick. I'm going to turn the CV down, and I'm going to bring the bypass up, or the bias up, and now we're just hearing the sine wave out of our first spectrum. So this is the spectrum we're hearing. We can adjust the octaves we're listening to, but that's what we're using. That is the carrier wave. So that is the wave that we are listening to. Now this second spectrum is what I'm using as the modulator wave. So I've got the sine wave output of it running into the CV input on the DVCA. So if we bring this back, bias in the middle, because it's a bipolar VCA, remember we can go right or left and we'll hear signal. In the middle, we'll get real close to not hearing anything. And then we'll turn up this CV here. And now we're modulating the amplitude in a bipolar fashion, so ring mod with the spectrum. So if I turn up the coarse tune, we're getting higher frequency modulation, which is creating that ring sound on top, right? So one of the tricks that I'm doing right now is I'm syncing this second spectrum with the first. So I've got the saw wave output running into the sync input. So check this out. If we listen to it again, I turn this down right, it's always sounding in tune. Both of these have the same volt per octave signal to them. And it's basically just adding high frequency harmonics, but keeping that fundamental intact, right? So what happens if we don't sync it? You get it, that modulation sound is way more apparent, and it's kind of taking over the actual frequency that you're hearing or that you're deciphering. So again, if we put sync in there, it just sounds more like it's in tune. So that's one trick, is to sync your modulator to your carrier, and now you're always going to have, now that fundamental is always going to be intact. So that's a really nice little trick. And one thing else we can do is I've got a second envelope here. So my first envelope is just going to the second part of the DVCA. So to rewind real quick, the first spectrum, sine wave out, is going through the DVCA. And then the output of the first channel of the DVCA is going into the second channel of the DVCA. And then that output is going into our mixer. So the first CV input of the DVCA is being modulated by our second spectrum. And then the second channel of the DVCA is being modulated by my multimode envelope here. So that's how we're getting the rhythm, right? So I can pull up the multimode envelope here, and we're getting more of a rhythmic thing. I also have this second ADSR VCA, so the second envelope, going into the FM input on the spectrum. So remember when I turn the coarse tune, we're adding harmonics to the signal. So I kind of thought that maybe we could make a filter kind of sound by running my envelope into the FM input of the spectrum. So watch listen to what it sounds like when we turn up the FM now. And I'm using a second envelope so that way my release can be at a different rate than the amplitude. So again with the beat. All right, so now we're at that point. Let's tear the thing apart and try and make it again and see what happens. So I'm just gonna pull everything out. All right, so let's start from scratch. We're gonna take our sine wave output. We're gonna run it into the DVCA. We're gonna take the output of the DVCA and just run it into, let's go to channel 6, just because we're probably gonna add some drums later. We're not hearing anything right now, but if I turn the bypass up, we're gonna hear on either side the wave, right? So now I'm just gonna add some rhythm. So I'm gonna take channel number 16, I'm gonna run that into my multi-mode envelope. And then we're gonna go out of the multi-mode envelope into the CV input, right? All right, so now we're running into the issue of clicks and pops because I've got a real fast attack there. So let's just hear what that sounds like with zero crossing on. We're on instant right now. There we go. All those clicks are gone. Go to a low frequency wave. And we'll turn them back on. We've got the clicks and pops, really inconsistent. Go back to the zero crossing, they're gone. So that's a cool thing about that. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to just make the ring modulation patch. So I've got the sine wave coming out, going through the DVCA into our mixer. Now I'm gonna take the sine wave out of my spectrum here, second spectrum, and let's just experiment. Let's see what it sounds like. With zero crossing on, that's adding a little bit of weirdness, so we're gonna take that and put it back to instant. And there we go. So this is what I usually think of when I think of ring modulation, right? So again, we're gonna take the saw wave out and we're gonna run it into the sync input on our second spectrum. And now that's going to make it sound a little bit more in tune, and it's just gonna add those harsh harmonics. All right, so now we've got that guy going. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna take the output and instead of going straight into the mixer, we're gonna go into the other side of DVCA. That way we can get some rhythm going. So I'm gonna take that out, put that into the mixer, and remember how we had this envelope going, I'm just gonna take the output of that envelope and run it into the CV input on the second channel here. So now I'm going to take the same rhythm, I'm just going to use channel 15 that's playing the same rhythm into my secondary envelope here, and I'm going to run that into the FM input on my modulating spectrum. We can mess around with that and we're kind of getting this really cool filter sound. But again, we're not using any filter. So now we can experiment a little bit, right? So we've got this sound, and we can experiment with octaves. We're just trying to make a cool tone, right? Now, one thing that people don't think about with modulation is filtering your modulating wave. So because we're using a sine wave, filtering it won't do much, right? But let's listen to a square wave as a modulator. Right? That just made it way harsher. But it's almost too harsh because it's that all the time, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take this square wave, we're going to run it into the pole 0, and we're going to take the output of the pole 0 and run that into the DVCA, the first channel. So now we have control from a nice smooth modulation to that square wave modulation. And when we add resonance, we're adding even more character on top of that. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I want to modulate that filter a little bit. And I don't have any mults in this case, and I actually don't really have any stackables with me at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the negative envelope out of the ADSR VCA. I'm going to run it into the FM input on the pole 0, but then I'm going to turn the FM amount to the negative side, which basically creates ourselves a positive envelope. And now when we mix all those things together, we're getting kind of a cool tone. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to run some pitches. So I've got my Volterra here. That's spitting out some pitches. I do have one mult cable, this Doppio cable from Luigi's Modular. I'm going to run that into both volt per octave inputs on my spectrum here. Let's hear it without zero crossing. You can hear those high frequency clicks in there. So put zero crossing back on the second side of the DVCA. We're rolling click free. Let's hear that with the beat. Oh wait, I don't have any drums anymore. Let's make some drums.
Let's get some drums. Kick drum. And then let's get some fracture in here. And I've just got this beat rolling, you know, so it's not much to remember. We're just using the same thing we're using earlier. So I was using the Chimera or Crucible as hi-hats. And I've got this last guy here for my Chimera. And then I have this guy going into the size on Crucible. Now let's listen to it.
There we go. Alright, so now my Crucible doesn't sound much like a hi-hat, right? So one little quick trick I like to do is just take audio rate modulation from any one of my oscillators and run it into the pitch. And that gives us more of a hi-hat kind of sound. Alright, so one thing we haven't done yet is listen to the difference between ring mod and just regular old amplitude modulation, right? So let's just flip the switch. Right now we're on bipolar VCA. Here's on regular VCA mode. Ooh, we're actually getting a little bit more low frequencies in there. Now back to ring mod. Now back to regular amplitude modulation. So that's going to be kind of a preference thing using bipolar VCA or just a normal VCA. DVCA is really great at that because you've got both options right there on a switch. So switching into the ring mod territory for a section of a part might be a good idea. Kind of adds an extra octave on top of that, but you lose a little bit of that low end. So then when you want to go back, throw it to regular amplitude modulation. Everything's still in tune. You still got all that character. You might lose a little bit of the high end squelch, but you've got that. So that's pretty much it, you know. Using a VCA, amplitude modulation, and ring mod as kind of a pseudo filter is a ton of fun. And I've done a video on it before as far as filtering your modulator with FM, but that's always super fun and just something I encourage you to mess around with. Again, the DVCA, great option if you're looking for any sort of VCA, nice and small. It's got that zero crossing, and then it's also got the bipolar function. So ring mod and any other thing you might need a bipolar VCA for right there at the flip of a switch. So thank you guys so much for watching. As always, like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit me up in the comments or send me an email if you have anything you would like to see demoed. Yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Peace.